the critical areas that I want to talk about are exercising the stress muscle, overcoming day-to-day challenges, and some personal exercises to help. So as I mentioned early on, every single person out there has challenges, struggles with overcoming new unforeseen situations. And again, this is the time for you to ask questions. So if you have something specific to your scenario, feel free to try to generalize it for the group, and we'll talk about it. We'll go through it and kind of give you that mindset thought process of how to overcome it. So again, it's a really important thing. The first topic, really exercising that stress muscle. The way I think about this particular item is, as you evolve throughout your business, you are going to come across new challenges, or it could be higher dollar value challenges. So for example, if you are buying your first property ever, and maybe it's a smaller 10-unit multifamily property, and you're going to put up $10,000 of earnest money to get the property under contract. That may be a challenge for you today, right? It may be very uncomfortable for you to write a check for $10,000 to get a property under contract, to do your inspections and so on and so forth. Well, as you evolve in the business and you start buying $50+ million properties for several hundred units, you may have to write checks for $1 million of earnest money to put up on a new deal. So you're still going to have to exercise that stress muscle. It's still going to be overcoming uncomfortability, if that's even a real word, or the feeling of discomfort to grow and evolve, right? It's the same concept of, if you want to get physically fit, you can't do that by sitting on the couch and being really comfortable with a blanket pulled over you watching TV for the day. But you need to go out, you need to get uncomfortable, you need to put your body through stressful physical exertion at the gym or out running or doing physical exercise to get into physical shape. And I think about the philosophy of sports professionals, right? They're out there testing themselves, pushing themselves to the max all the time so they can perform well under pressure. And it's the same thing that we need to do as real estate professionals. And so exercising that stress muscle, being comfortable with discomfort is going to make you successful. It is going to help you evolve in the business. And so, like I said, if you're out trying to buy your first deal and you are feeling really uncomfortable about putting up an earnest money deposit, that's a good feeling to have. Everyone goes through that, and you will continue to go through that as you do larger deals and higher dollar value deals. You're going to continue to exercise that stress muscle. And I'm going to pause here and see if we had any questions here in the chat box. There is no slide deck. I am just going off of the webinar page for today. So again, we're talking about exercising the stress muscle. And if you continue to exercise it, you will overcome your challenges and really be in a better position. And so, one of the best ways to overcome, in my first example of putting up an earnest money deposit for your first property, is really getting yourself comfortable with what activities you have to do, and ways to ensure you are protected. And so if you don't understand what terms your earnest money deposit is tied to, then you need to do that in order to be comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling. So know the terms of what you are agreeing to, know the contract. And in order to really move forward, you have to put money out there to work in order to grow your business or buy your first deal or buy your 10th deal. You are going to have to make those kind of stomach wrenching decisions at times to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's a continuous journey of exercising that stress muscle to overcome new challenges. You know, one example that we had in a deal, what was it? It must have been in 2019. So a couple years ago, we had a deal under contract. We did due diligence. Everything was going really well. And we had a phase 1 environmental report come back that really was a challenge for us. So down the street, since the property was owned by the previous owner, a dry cleaner set up a dry cleaning facility in a strip plaza. And the dry cleaning facility had some I'm going to butcher the environmental words, but some of the chemicals that they used getting into the soil. And one of our test canisters, when we did our environmental report, came back and it required further study. And so we were really stressed out about closing this deal on time because we had hard money out there. We had a specific timeline in our contract to close in, I'm going to say 60 days from the time we signed the purchase and sale agreement. And so this kind of curveball really had us exercising the stress muscle because, you know, number one, we couldn't do anything about the environmental report. And so we were just very transparent with the seller and we said, hey, look, here's what our report uncovered. We need to extend the closing date by 30 days in order for additional testing to occur. And we were just very transparent with it. But again, it was out of our hands, a very stressful time. And the seller, you know, was agreeable to the terms and understandable to that condition because they didn't know about the dry cleaning facility. They didn't know about the soil measurement levels from an environmental perspective. And so they said, you know, understood, we'll extend the closing. And that was a huge weight off of our shoulders when we were able to extend that because, you know, theoretically that seller could have come back and said, nope, you either close on time or we're going to move on and do something else with the property. And so again, very stressful situation. But ultimately, you know, the best way to deal with things is head on. And so the other important piece to exercising that stress muscle is having a contact, a mentor, a friend, someone who has been through the business to be a phone call away to help you through it. And so thankfully, we called our mentor and said, hey, here's the situation. Have you dealt with this before? And got some very good professional advice on how to deal with it, which again, made us feel a little bit more comfortable, still a little stressful in that scenario, but ultimately got through that stressful time. And so I want everyone to take just a moment and think back over the last 3 months or even year to date. So since 2021 started, think about some of those stressful times that you've had and think about how you've dealt with them or how you could deal with things differently if you have a forum, a mentor, or someone to go to ask the question of, hey, have you had this problem before? How have you dealt with it? How do you think I could deal with it? And what's the next best step forward? And so for us, just in the example of the environmental issue, we've dealt with that problem before. We've exercised that stress muscle. We know how to deal with it going forward. And so it's not as stressful, excuse me, of a scenario as it comes up. And that's why I call it exercising the stress muscle, because you'll stretch yourself, you'll get more comfortable with challenges that will pop up from time to time. And so again, like I said, if anyone has a question, has a specific scenario, feel free to put it in the chat box and we can try to address it as best we can, to go through whatever it is that may be holding you back or making you feel uncomfortable in the day-to-day business. So as far as overcoming those day-to-day challenges, I think I gave a great explanation of, having someone in the network, having a forum or a group or a business partner to talk to and work through any of those challenges. And as you get through more challenges, you do more deals, you're going to be more comfortable with some of those discomforts that do come up. A great exercise, again, from a personal perspective to get through this is to think about some of the worst case scenarios with it. So if I go back to our environmental example, while you feel very stressed out and worried about some issue, if I think back to that deal, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario would be the seller not extending the deal and we can't close on it in time because of the environmental issue. That would be the absolute worst case scenario. Does it mean that I'm not going to have food on the table to eat, that my family may no longer talk to me? Probably not. And so going through that worst case scenario of what's the worst thing that's going to happen? We're going to lose a deal. We're going to lose money. It's going to be really unfortunate, but at the end of the day, we're going to continue to live. We're going to continue to survive, and we can get through that. That type of mindset really helps kind of put everything into perspective and gives you a sense of calm. I'm not going to say you're going to feel great about yourself. You're still going to have a little bit of stress from some of these challenges, but it's going to give you a little sense of calm or relief, to just be able to kind of step back from the issue and say, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if this outcome occurs, or what's the worst that's going to happen if this outcome occurs, and really step back and take a high level approach to it and just say, okay, if this is the worst thing, or this is the worst outcome, am I going to be okay personally? Am I going to be okay from a business perspective? Am I going to be okay from a family life perspective? And allow yourself to kind of calm down, refocus, and again, make the most educated business decision to help you get through those challenging times without having some of that emotion or stress involved in the process. And it's a really good exercise going through that worst case scenario, to help you kind of level out, calm down a little bit, and really focus on it. Because again, as I said already, everyone goes through these challenges and stressful situations. And it's always important to have a clear and kind of level thinking to go through that process and really make the best decision. So let me pause, and I'm going to check the Q&A box and I'll check the chat box. So if anyone has questions or a specific example, feel free to ask that and let's go through that. So one of the first questions in here, COVID has been challenging and full of uncertainties, which cause hesitation around closing deals. Some worry about losing a 9-to-5 job maybe, and limited cash flow from properties. What strategies can we employ to alleviate some of the challenges of COVID and maybe worrying about property performance. Well, the one thing to kind of break it down from a property performance perspective is to really just look at a month by month view. We don't know what the future will hold. We've obviously made it through COVID. It's been, 14 or so months since it really started to break here in the United States. And so, if you have a challenging property that really had concerns over the last year, maybe break it down and just say, let's get through this month. Where are we at with occupancy? Where are we at with collections? And let's get through this month, and we'll see where we're at next month, and try to piecemeal things out rather than thinking about, oh geez, where are we going to be in 12 months if everyone loses their job? Well, that hasn't happened. People are still working. So let me piece things out and let me look at it this month. Today is May 11th. Where is my rent roll at? How many tenants have paid? What can we do to help more folks pay if they haven't? And really just try to break it down into actionable steps, because we can't control what happens tomorrow. We can't control the future, but let's see where we're at today, what we can do today to help the situation, and kind of go from there. So let me see here. In the chat box, let's see, I got to scroll a little bit here. Okay. Good question in here, Brad. Now that you're aware of environmental issues, should you add some language to extend if an environmental issue arises? Absolutely. You can do that. So typically, if you're buying a occupied property that's recently traded in the last 5 or 10 years, chances are the owner of the property has an environmental report from when they purchased the asset. So doing environmental studies is always required by any lender when you're buying a deal. And so sellers and buyers should be aware and understand that environmental issues would prevent an owner from selling a deal in the future. And so if you can address it and get it cleaned up now, it's always better. So having some sort of clause in the contract would be very typical to say, okay, if there's an environmental issue, buyer and seller agree to work together to resolve it. Or if it can't be resolved, buyer and seller agree to terminate contract without any damages to either party involved. And so very typical, I would say, work with your attorney, talk to the broker, understand the property and the condition of what you're buying. So if there's an old environmental report, always ask for that and kind of work through that. So it's not uncommon. Mark, myself and a fellow investor invested with operators who haven't lived up to their operating agreement. Not providing K1s, not doing accounting, left the asset management up to LPs. What recourse? Speaking with an attorney about potentially voting them out. What a challenge, Mark. It's one of the biggest reasons to always vet the operators or the general partners before you invest in a deal. Always ask for references. If the operator isn't willing to provide references, that to me would be a red flag. Dan has written a great article about the 7 red flags to look for before you invest in a deal. And so I would always just take caution and do your diligence before investing with other folks. Mark, in terms of that specific scenario, I would try to find out if you know anyone in your network who went through a similar issue and what they did to overcome that challenge. It's certainly a unique and very tricky situation. So I unfortunately have not been through that before, but I would try to find someone in the network, maybe try to find someone else in the deal with you and get through that. Shane asks, is there a size of property that needs to have an environmental study? Typically, if you are getting an agency loan, well, really, I'm even thinking back to some smaller deals that I did with local community banks. If you're buying a commercial property, most of them will want you to do an environmental study. I'll say like the rule of thumb is maybe if you're buying like 30 units and up, maybe if your loan amount is $1 million and up, you would most likely be required to have an environmental study done. They're typically, a couple $1,000s depending on the size and location and what needs to be done. So it's just a part of your closing costs, and you should plan to always do an environmental study for your projects. Now, if you're buying, a 10-unit property down the street and the local community bank is giving you a few $100,000 to buy it and it's made and maintained, maybe you don't have to do one, but any sort of commercial loan, or larger loan amount, like I said, $1 million and up, you're probably going to have to do an environmental study. So I hope that helps there, Shane. Let's go back. Carlos, I have 2 huge deals, one's 75, the other's 275. They need a business bio. Carlos, we can follow up in the premium call on that question. Any advice for investing remotely, especially Canadians investing in the US with border restrictions? So I guess the stress muscle here would be the property is not in your backyard and it may be challenging to get to with the kind of COVID and border immigration restrictions. At the end of the day, I think you have to think about your personal goal of why are you investing, and if you're looking to passively invest in real estate and have cash flow, then seeing or going to the property is not as important, right? Because the operator or the general partner, as long as you vet them properly, will handle any of the day-to-day needs or actually being on site. So if your goal is to passively invest, then you shouldn't want to go to the property. And so that may be a mindset shift for you. If you've always been hands-on and active investor, and now you're a little uncomfortable investing passively and having a little bit less control, then spend your time doing your due diligence on a great operator and a great general partner, and that should get you comfortable with it. Now, if you are living overseas trying to invest in the US and do it actively, I I've never had that scenario. So I would say try to find a network of foreign investors, maybe on Meetup or through MFIN, and ask in the Facebook group if anyone is a foreign investor, and network with them, see what they do to overcome that challenge. I would think with today's technology, you could find a local real estate agent if you own a property in Montana, making this up, in the state of Montana, and you could probably pay them $50 to go and take a Facebook Live or a FaceTime call with you, and they could drive the entire property, show you everything that's going on. And maybe that would be a good level of comfort if you're trying to actively invest. But again, I think you're going to have to find someone trustworthy to be your boots on the ground if you can't get into the country as quickly as you would like. Okay, so let's see here. We got that one. Again, I kind of went through what I had to cover today. What other questions or items do folks have that are challenging them? We covered some great items as far as, investing remotely, vetting your sponsor or operator, general partner, overcoming environmental challenges. It's not one that you commonly think about just because it's just a due diligence item that you kind of check off, but certainly taking adequate time to complete your physical due diligence, your financial due diligence, and environmental due diligence are all very important steps when buying a property. We covered kind of overcoming the day-to-day challenges, really networking with others who have gone and done it before you, or maybe in a very similar situation, is great. And so as you have any more questions, I'll take a few more, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day. So if you have any questions, Q&A box or use the chat box. I'll do my best to monitor both as we go. Brad has a question here of how or where can I get purchase contracts that give me more security and keep the stress down for things that I may be unaware of? Well, you should read purchase and sale agreements in full. So when you are looking to get a property under contract, typically in the commercial space, the buyer or the seller will have a draft version of a contract that you'll update. And so if you have not bought a property before, you may want to network with an attorney and ask them to send you a draft version of a purchase and sale agreement that you could read through to educate yourself on the terms and the conditions in that agreement. And that will help you get more comfortable with it. If you've done several deals before, you should have access to purchase and sale agreements. And again, from a commercial side, between the buyer and the seller and between their attorneys, you're going to negotiate what is included and excluded from that agreement. And so it never hurts to ask for more items to be included if that makes you feel more comfortable. Let's see here. Forming a first partnership to get into commercial. Give us some info on best practices for partnerships, percentage splits, operating agreements, all that fun stuff. So Shane, with this one, the best practice of forming a partnership is to really vet the folks you're going to be partnering with and have the same alignment of interest for long-term goals as well as short-term goals. And what I mean by that is if you have a partner who is extremely focused on quitting their day job to go into real estate full time, and they want to get as much cash flow as they can. And you are, on the other hand, not needing a ton of cash flow day one. You're in it for a longer term appreciation and longer term growth. That could be a disparity of interests. One person more focused on short term, one person focused more on long term. So having the alignment of interest for the long-term vision and goals is really important before partnering with people. Real estate is great because you can partner with someone on a deal-by-deal basis to get started. You don't have to form a company and write up a big operating agreement. You can say, hey, let's be 50-50 partners on this one deal. We'll see how it goes. And we'll have a discussion before we do our second deal if we think we need to change anything up. So that would be my rule of thumb, is just kind of get started, do one deal at a time, feel the person out, see how well you work together, see what complementary skill sets you are bringing to the table. And I would just encourage you to spend more time getting to know them as a person, determine the long-term goals of you and any partners as individuals, and then start in business together on a deal-by-deal basis and kind of go from there. Finding money from investors is always a challenge. Any tips there? My tips for raising capital would be to have conversations about it. So if you dislike talking to investors and money makes you feel uncomfortable, well, you need to do it more frequently. And if you're having one conversation a week, maybe you need to ramp it up to have one conversation a day, every single day, Saturday and Sunday included, to get you more comfortable with that. Having the money conversation should not be an uncomfortable thing. And, you know, if you've never had an investor conversation before, usually the first, 5 conversations are a little bit tough. And once you get into that 6th conversation, the 7th, the 8th, you get a little bit more comfortable with it. You know the flow of how things go. And so I would just say do it more frequently, and you'll get better at it. You'll get a sense of what questions to ask people, how to ask the question, and it will start to flow a lot better, and you'll do a much better job. So I would just say my tip there is to have more frequent conversations, and you'll absolutely find more funds. Okay, and with that, everyone, I'm going to take this one last question, and then we will wrap up unless there is a pressing one that comes in. So listed duties that a general partner should perform when getting started. So, I mean, the general partner at the end of the day is responsible for every aspect of the deal. So, getting the legal documents set up, getting a PPM sent out, getting investor capital in, doing due diligence on the asset, hiring a good management company to oversee the deal, doing the asset management of the deal. So the general partner is responsible for every task that needs to be done. And that's really the philosophy that you need to follow is if something needs to be done and you're the GP, you're the general partner, you're the operator, you're the sponsor, it's your job to make sure that it gets done. I'm not saying you as the GP personally need to do everything, but you need to oversee that every task gets done. And so, an attorney should write up the operating agreement. You as the general partner should read it, make sure you understand and agree with all of those terms, and then that document gets completed. So ultimately, if you're the GP, you do and oversee everything. And if there's an issue or an error or something is wrong, it is your fault as the GP, because again, you are responsible for every aspect of that deal. With that, I thank all of you for joining us for today's Tuesday Multifamily Investor Nation webinar. Check out the webinar page. I'll see if Melissa has had it refreshed, and she is way too good for us. So thank you, Melissa. Next week's webinar, how to get started in apartment syndication with no experience. We have 6 days and 23 hours to go until next week's webinar. So if you haven't already registered, go ahead and register for the webinar, and you will be entered in to that. You'll get the reminder, you'll get the invite for it, and we will go from there. Melissa has also posted the link in the chat box. So have a great week, everyone. Exercise that stress muscle. Go out, get uncomfortable, and you're going to improve and get better from that experience, and never be afraid to ask for help or support. So have a great rest of the week, and we will see you all next week on the webinar for how to get started in syndication without any experience. So thank you all for joining, and we'll catch you next week.